Part 1, Chapter 3. Got an empty interview room, Manny? The cop said to the uniform behind the long desk at the police station. Around me, unhappy people shouted, cried, argued. The uniform looked me up and down. Evening, Marchie, he replied. He consulted a book. Number 3 is guest-free at the moment. This one's unofficial for the time being, Marchie said. He pushed me down a corridor, threw open a door, and shoved me inside. A table and 3 chairs sat under a garish ceiling light. Sit, he ordered. I did as he said. He reached behind him, came up with a pair of handcuffs, snapped one ring around my wrist and the other around a table leg. Don't go anywhere, he said, and left, slamming the door. A shiver ran down my back. The room was warm, but my clothes and hair were still soaking wet from the rain. With my free hand, I felt the back of my head. Blood came away on my fingers. My nostrils were plugged with blood, too. I blew them clear and winced from the pain, wiped my hand on my pant leg. I looked towards the mirror on the opposite wall, did my best to offer a sneer in case someone was watching from the other side. I settled back, got as comfortable as I could with my arm shackled to the table leg, and waited. Jesus, my father groaned, shaking his head. Look at you. What the hell have you done this time? Marchie the cop had come back to the interview room hours later and driven me across town through the rainy dawn to the apartment house where I lived with my father. He hadn't said a word during the trip. At our door, he had shaken hands with my father and followed me inside. What do you care? I answered. Now look. Marchie held up his hand as if directing traffic. Later, fellas. I gotta get a load off my feet, okay? Why doesn't Lee get cleaned up and you and me can discuss the situation, he suggested. While I showered and changed my clothes, I heard them talking in the living room. It was only when I returned that I noticed a suitcase beside the door. Sit down, Lee, the cop said. I stood where I was and looked at my father. He was wearing his coveralls, ready for work at the auto shop a few blocks away. His dark hair was combed straight back, his pale face drawn, and he had his "what am I going to do with you" look on. He nodded toward the couch. Do like Marchie says, Lee? The cop sat on the edge of the ottoman beside my father's tattered easy chair, so I was facing the two of them like in an interview. Marchie still had his overcoat on with a checkered sports jacket underneath. Lee, my father began, working hard to keep his voice steady. This is Sergeant Marchie Carpino. He's a friend from way back. He was good enough to call me after he picked you up. Thanks to him, you haven't been arrested. Thanks to him, my nose is probably broken, I said. My father ground a fist into his palm. I've just about reached the end of my rope. I'm scared that if you go on like this, you'll end up in jail. So I've made a decision. He paused as if psyching himself up and took a deep breath, locking eyes with me. You're going to New Toronto to live with your Aunt Rena, he said. I called her last night after I heard from Marchie. I'm not. My father shot out of his chair, pale with rage. Shut up, he shouted. Just shut the hell up. I've had enough. He hung his head, breathing deeply, sat back down. When he had regained control, he said, Lee, you're going. That's all there is to it. Marchie will explain things on the way. Marchie stood, walked to the door, and picked up the suitcase. Do I need to cuff you? I looked at my father. He returned my stare, his eyes flinty with determination. No, I said to the cop. I got nowhere to run. Carpino took the on-ramp and merged into the traffic on the Queen Elizabeth Way. As we headed east, the rain let up and the swarm of cars, trucks, and buses bunched tighter. Carpino fumbled his pack of cigarettes from inside his pocket. You feel like listening now, he asked. Do I have a choice? See, he said, lightening up. That kind of smart-ass talk indicates that the answer to my question is no. Trouble is, I gotta explain some things to you before I drop you off. But first, you gotta open your ears. I stared at the floor. Between my feet, an empty paper cup rolled back and forth. So talk. Your father wants you to live with your aunt for a while. Yeah, well, as soon as you drop me off, I'm out of there, and I figured I should explain things real clear so you don't do what you just said you were going to do. You want a cigarette? Don't smoke. One for the plus side. Anyway, here's the thing. You've been suspended from school twice for fighting. The Board of Ed told your dad that next time you're expelled for good. I don't give a, and I'm pretty sure you're behind a couple of assaults that happened near your school. It's only a matter of time before we can hang them on you. When that happens, You're not a naughty boy fighting in the schoolyard anymore. You'll go into custody. Believe me, you don't want that. I kept my mouth shut. There were 3 assaults, not 2, if you counted the grade 9 kid I grabbed and shook without working him over like I was supposed to. He was so terrified I thought he was going to piss himself. Werner hadn't been too happy when he found out I let the kid go with a warning. As we passed the junction with the Highway 427, Carpino eased the car into the collector lanes. By now, the traffic was moving slowly, people heading downtown to work. Carpino took the turnoff for 18th Street and pulled up at a traffic light. He lit a fresh cigarette off the butt of the old one and took up his lecture. Beside the assaults, we got you for break and enter. Throw in resisting arrest, and we'll have you eating institution food until well past your best before date. Bullshit. I'll get off, I said, with more confidence than I felt. I didn't know much about the legal system. I got no record. I'm a young offender. That one's easy, Lee. We nail you for one of the assaults, you go to court. Get let off by some kindly but stupid judge, like you said, but then you'll have a record. We pick you up for the other assaults and the burglary. Then you go inside. He braked and steered into a parking lot behind a small hotel and turned off the motor. Now, I hope you're clear on your situation, Lee. If I have to arrest you, I'll throw the book at you, like they say in the TV cop shows. If you stay here with your aunt, he nodded towards the door in the building across the street, I let you alone. There's nobody to go back to anyway except your dad, and he's not happy with you right now. I don't need him, I spat. I got my friends. Who? The tarantulas? Yeah, the tarantulas. At least they got some loyalty. He ran the window down a few inches and tossed the butt out. Haven't you figured out why we were waiting for you when you jumped off the fire escape? We'd been investigating a series of burglaries in the area. Offices, warehouses, all small concerns without much security. We got a call, tipping us off that the auto parts store was going to be hit. Carpino rolled the window back up and turned towards me, his eyes hard. Think about this, he said. Who knew you were going to break into that place? I didn't remember my aunt very well. She wasn't around when I was a kid, but I had stayed with her once before when my mother was dying. Mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer when I was 7. She was an art lover and a painter whose unframed landscapes were tacked up all over our apartment. My father wanted to take her to Italy before she died. Although he never put it in those words, because she had always dreamed of visiting Rome and Venice and Florence to feast on paintings and sculptures. I remember the discussions and arguments Mom and Dad had about the expense, about maybe taking me with them, before they finally packed me up and drove me to my aunt's, promising they'd come home soon and bring me lots of presents. When they returned, she was pale and weak. She had lost weight, but her eyes were bright with excitement, and she began a new painting the same day. Before she was able to finish it, an ambulance carried her off to the hospital. They hooked her up with wires and tubes, and her body under the bed sheet was like the stick figures I drew at school. She never came home. One afternoon, my father sat me down in the kitchen and crouched before me, holding my hands, and told me in a voice he could barely control to pretend she was on another trip and that we'd see her again someday. Even at 7, I was too old for that crap. I was confused and terrified, but I knew my mother wasn't on holiday. I hardly saw my father after that. He held 2 jobs, the auto repair during the day, a department store at nights and on Saturdays. Neither one paid a decent wage. He was gone when I got up in the morning and never home before 10 at night, when he'd drag himself into the apartment, eat, have a few beers, and fall asleep in front of the TV. When I was little, babysitters looked after me Saturdays and after schools. When I got older, I took care of myself. For a long time, I thought he was burying himself in work because he missed my mom. Then one day I realized it was more than that. He was paying back the thousands he had borrowed so he could take her to Italy. From the age of 7, I grew up without parents. One was dead, one was a zombie who hardly spoke to me, who I often felt blamed me in some way for his wife's deadly illness, which was funny because for a long time I blamed him. I spent most of my life alone without much help when my eyes dimmed from the dark rage that took hold of me and scared the hell out of me because I didn't know what it was or how to deal with it.